So, as part of our year's theme of looking at myths, symbols and stories, we're currently in the middle of a series of talks looking at the Wheel of Life, which we have here at the front. And we've seen that the Wheel of Life is an ancient visual aid in Buddhism. It's a depiction of the ultimate vicious circle of existence. And as long as we're aiming for whatever the Wheel of Life offers us, then we will encounter ups and downs, but we won't find lasting satisfaction. So the image of the wheel evokes repetition, repeated cycles, revolving in states of dissatisfaction. And like the wheel of a cart, as the wheel of a cart goes round and round, it makes deeper and deeper ruts in the track. So yeah, there's this feeling of deepening ruts, deepening habits. And you can also think of the Wheel of Life as a sort of mirror. It's a mirror reflecting back to us the many states that we pass through in our lives. And the more closely we look into the wheel, what we really see is ourselves, particularly the reactive patterns of our minds. But we'll discover later in this series that the Wheel of Life is not merely a negative, depressing image. It's not, round and round and round. But it's a spur to change, actually. It's a rallying call to wake up and to take our destiny in our own hands. But that's in a few weeks' time. In fact, next week there's a talk on escape, the escape from the wheel. Okay, so what we've looked at already, we've looked at the very centre of the wheel, the hub. And we've seen that within that wheel is the central delusion that we have, the central delusion of a fixed, separate self. And that's represented by a pig. And this delusion leads to grasping after whatever strengthens that view, represented by a cock, and ill will or fear towards whatever threatens that view, and that's represented by a snake. And then in the second section, we've also looked at there are beings, and some of the beings are moving upwards, and some of the beings are moving downwards. And so this, very briefly, tells us that, well, we can't stay the same. All things that arise will pass away. All good states that arise will pass away. All bad states that arise will pass away. Life is change, and the good side of that, of course, is that we can change. And this also represents the law of karma. So the law of karma is the driving force of the Wheel of Life. And we've seen that there's two aspects of karma. So our future is determined by our actions in the present. So that's one aspect of karma. And the second aspect is that our experience of the world is determined by our mental states. And last week and this week we've been looking at the 6 realms of the Wheels of Life. So they make up the bulk of the wheel. This section here. And traditionally, one interpretation of this is they represent states of being that that we're reborn into life after life. But they can also represent states of mind that we're reborn into moment by moment. And last week, Satyajati looked at 3 of these realms. So she looked at the hell realm, a realm of actual intense suffering. She looked at the realm of hungry ghosts, a realm of addictive, obsessive craving. And she looked at the realm of the titans, which is a realm of aggression, competition, envy, ego jousting. And in all these 3 realms, what they've got in common is that there's little energy or freedom spare to devote to evolving higher states of consciousness. So in those realms, beings are either coping with suffering, or they're putting energy into satisfying craving, or they're putting energy into securing a position of superiority. So this week I'll be looking at the remaining 3 realms. So it's the realm of the animals, the gods and the humans. And hopefully by the end of the talk we'll have discovered the basic conditions that need to be in place so that we can start to find our way towards freedom, towards escape, towards freedom from the endless cycles of reactivity and re-becoming. So firstly, the animal realm. On this wheel, the animal realm is down here. And in that animal realm, there are all sorts of animals, wild and domesticated, mostly in pairs. It's not a literal scene of a wildlife landscape. You very rarely see scenes of predation or aggression in there. It's quite an idyllic scene, just animals going about being animals. And so really, it's a metaphor for animalistic states of being. So I'll say for Laura Dogg's benefit that there's no value judgment on animals. I myself am an animal lover. But, so we're not talking about giving animals a hard time. We're looking at what do animals represent in terms of their states of being. Or what they represent are states of indulgence, sensual indulgence, and also self-preservation. Going after the basic sensual pleasures of life, of food, sex, sleep, and comfort. And when animals are getting these things, when animals are getting this, they can be quite tame, they can be quite placid. But when these things are frustrated, then things get dangerous, things get wild, savage, barbaric, messy. So animals have what's described as a simple consciousness. So by that I mean, basically most animal forms, they perceive images, they perceive signals, and they respond to them. So that is a simple consciousness. And animals generally also have a herd consciousness, a collective consciousness. So amongst animals, it's only small chance genetic variations that distinguish individuals from each other. And the basic animal urges and communications. Okay, so I had a bit of a brainstorm about this. So I think most animalistic communication is some variation of I want it, I want you, come and get me, he's mine, hands off, I'm stronger than you, stay out of my space, or you're not one of us. So those are sort of the basic animal type communications. And as I brainstormed, I did have to ask myself the question, how much of my life and my communication is that different from these basic needs? I'll leave that question for you. So yeah, in the animal realm, the affairs of the body, this going after food, sex, sleep, comfort, convenience, that becomes the sole aim, and it becomes the sole aim of life to the exclusion of higher matters. So similar to the three realms that Satyajati talked about last week, in the animal realm, we're spending so much energy going after those things, we don't actually have energy spare to devote to higher matters. And in each of the six realms, there is a Buddha figure. And the Buddha figure is there to offer something to beings in those realms. And in the animal realm, the Buddha is holding a book. Okay, so a book denotes learning, and particularly it denotes the arising of culture, of civilization, of the arts, sciences, and crafts. And at their best, most of these things have a refining influence on us. So throughout history, Buddhism has spread. It started in India and it's spread all around the world. And the pattern has been that where, as Buddhism has spread, it has also transmitted culture. It's transmitted a refining influence into the places that it's been. And this is important because a more refined, humanistic culture is a necessary supportive condition for the spiritual life. Because if all we're able to do, because of circumstances or out of choice, if all we're able to do is see to our basic material needs, our basic survival needs, then it's actually very difficult to develop spiritually. Most of you will know, but I'll say for those who don't, that I spent a few years living in India, and while I was there, I was working with children, and I go back to India quite often, and I visit some of the children that I worked with. And it was a few years ago, I went to visit one of my friends, who I've talked about in other talks, called Jackie, and he lives in a slum area in Calcutta. And I think it was the year that I discovered the Dharma. I think it was the year I was travelling in India and I read my first Dharma book. And I was excited about it. And I was talking to Jackie, and I was just talking about what I discovered, talking about my travels, talking about my future plans. I sort of felt like I got a new lease of life. And he was very pleased for me. But then later on, he took me onto the roof of his house, where there's a view of slums all around. And he said, just look, and basically all you can see in all directions are the tops of slum dwellings. And he just turned to me and he said, this is not a good place. Many of the people here behave like animals, but this is my world. This is my child's world, and I don't know any other world. And that had a very strong impact. That sense of the limited horizons that he had, and also how fortunate I was. I was full of all this travel, this adventure, this new learning, and it just really struck home what a luxury, what a privilege that is, what a great blessing actually. And when I think about it though, yes, I have this fortune, I have these blessings, but if I think about it, I do spend a lot of my time in animalistic states of being, looking after my material needs. What about us? We're rarely in a situation of not having our basic material needs met. We rarely lack a basic level of education. We could be leading quite sophisticated lives, really. We might know how to operate quite complex technology. We're quite capable of functioning in a modern world. But still, our drive to satisfy our need for comfort may still be dominating. So I was thinking about this, and I'm sure there's lots of areas, but a couple of things came up for me. So, in our society, one of the features of our society is the dominance of consumerism. Okay, and consumerism could be described as the philosophy of the animal. Actually, you think animals, they're born, they consume, they mate, and they die. So consumerism is really the philosophy of the animal. And it has a very levelling effect, not levelling in the sense of equal opportunities, but levelling in the sense of squashing. Consumerism tends to create monocultures. So if you go to any city in the United Kingdom and go to its most popular shopping centre, you can probably predict what shops are there, what you can buy there, what's available. So consumerism tends to squash culture, and because of that, it tends to restrict our horizons too. It buries the cultural treasures of a society under heaps of stuff that we can own, heaps of stuff that we sort of grasp after for comfort and convenience. And the second aspect of our society, which is quite strong, and I quite often compare to Indian society, is alienation. So we also live in a society where people live increasingly alienated and disconnected lives, where a sense of isolation, disconnectedness, and meaninglessness is rife. And sometimes it can leave you feeling a bit downhearted, a bit out of touch with your inspiration. And when I'm like that, I get slothful. There's two words, slothful and sluggish, which both related to animals, and they sort of describe the mental states I get into when I'm just going after food, sex, sleep, comfort. So when I get slothful, I wake up in the morning, it can take all my effort just to get out of bed and make my breakfast, let alone meditating, studying, creating anything, doing worthwhile work. So to lift ourselves out of the animal realm, we need cultural education. We need cultural riches and treasures. We need to develop our ability to appreciate beauty. We need to stay in touch with our motivation in order to rise above meaninglessness which surrounds us. We need to be united with what is true, what is beautiful, what is meaningful. And we need to evolve and refine our consciousness to a point where it becomes possible to start to move more and more beyond self-centeredness, beyond consumerism, beyond alienation. In short, we need to become integrated, positive and purposeful human beings. We need to become conscious, self-aware individuals who can take independent decisions, who can take our own destiny in our hands. And in a way, this is all represented by the Book of Learning. In a way, this is what the Book of Learning offers. The gift of the Book of Learning raises us from the animal realm and brings us into the truly human realm. But we're going to come back to the human realm later. So first, it's all been a bit heavy so far, so we're going to float up to a different world. We're going to float up for a while into the God realm for some light relief. So, unsurprisingly, the God realm is right at the top. And the God realm is a vision of a beautiful heavenly realm, full of light, full of pleasures and delights. It's full of radiant, graceful beings who are basking in positive mental states, often described as feeding on rapture. And in this realm, every wish is instantly gratified. So there's no need to work, actually. There's no need to spend your energy. You can just spend all your energy meditating and get into really nice mental states. And in the time of the Buddha, people seem to experience the world differently. So very often in the Pali Canon, people talk about non-human heavenly beings and spirits. And they talk about realms high above the human world, with increasingly refined, increasingly beautiful beings, beings who are more and more satisfied with how things are, living longer lives. But this world of heavenly beings, this world of celestial beings, isn't usually part of our modern worldview or experience. So, what does such a realm represent for us? Well, the God realm could be said to represent a happy state of mind, basically. A happy state of mind, relaxed, at ease, with everything going quite smoothly, life seeming easy and effortless, with no major obstacles or difficulties to overcome. It could be experienced in the deep, calm bliss of absorbed meditative states. It could be experienced in enjoyment of the arts. It could be experienced in appreciation of the beauty of the natural world. And people who inhabit such states are quite attractive to be around. They're very appealing to be around. They tend to be light-hearted, carefree, positive, bright, well, happy. And that can tend to put us at our ease. So it's as if that they shine from within with happiness that just comes comes naturally from spiritual practice, from living ethically. So again, I ask myself the question, when have I experienced life like this? The answer was slower to arise this time. Not often, actually, not often. I can think of a couple of situations. So the first situation is a couple of retreats that I've been on. Particularly retreats in beautiful environments where there's a lot of silence. And in those situations, you're withdrawn from a lot of input that can disturb and distract you. And also, you don't have to put much effort into looking after your basic needs. Quite often, a lot of your basic needs are taken care of. So there's been a couple of retreats where I've just experienced extended periods of joy, actually, joy and contentment and peace. And another situation where I've had heavenly-like states is teams, actually. Is teams. Working in teams. So I've worked in a few teams. I've worked in the Evolution Shop team. I've worked in the Centre team here. And it's not always a heavenly realm. But yeah, something about working in teams when there's harmony, when everyone happens to be in a pretty good state at the same time, and people are communicating positively and openly, and there's a shared vision. Sometimes you can just feel like, oh, this is just like heaven, actually. So those are the two reflections I had on the God realm and me. And they're both great situations to be in. You know, they're both, it's really nurturing, it increases your confidence. You tend to be able to see things more clearly. Things can become more vivid to you, and you can feel more in touch with your inspiration. So what's the problem? What's the problem with going after lots and lots of that? Well, in one sense, there isn't a problem. As we'll see in later talks, actually, that a lot of the states that I've talked about, a lot of the positive states of calm, peace, joy, bliss, rapture, these positive states are similar to those that will be encountered as someone approaches the freedom of enlightenment. The problem with the God realm is that basking in these states becomes an end in itself. Okay? And getting into these positive states becomes disconnected from the bigger picture. It becomes disconnected from higher truths, from vision. The reality is that however wonderful these states are that we might get into, they will come to an end. These positive states, they're almost certainly the fruits of conditions that we put ourselves in the past, positive past actions. And a time comes when those karmic actions, the karmic actions that lead to these consequences have worked themselves out. They've come to full fruition. Or sometimes it's just that conditions change quite dramatically and we get knocked off course. So the great danger of the heavenly realm is complacency, taking things for granted. When we're happy and enjoying life, it's so easy to lose self-awareness. And without awareness, it's easy to slip into unskillful behaviour, to take our eye off the ball. We can forget about the importance of conditions, and we can forget about impermanence. So the whole of the wheel of life is held by a big red demon who is the god of death. He represents impermanence. It's all held within impermanence. So we get into these positive states, and we think we've attained some lasting noble state purely because of our own efforts, or just because we're special. But then things change. So a classic example of this is coming back off retreat. So there's a syndrome which I've called the post-retreat trapdoor. Okay, so not all retreats are like this, but sometimes on retreat you get into this momentum and you build progressively more positive states. You get happier and happier, and you can get a sense like, oh yeah, I've made it now. I've really cracked this meditation mark, and I've worked really hard this week, and now I've made it. And of course, you come back from retreat, the world floods in, and your habitual signals to the world, responses to the world just flood out, and it can be quite dramatic fall sometimes, but still worth going. Maybe most importantly is that there can be something unreal about these situations, actually, because we are withdrawn. We're withdrawn from suffering, from dissatisfaction, from discomfort. And Buddhism tells us that suffering is an inevitable characteristic of life. Not that all life is suffering, but that if we're living life within the wheel of life, suffering, dissatisfaction will arise. So if we're not seeing or experiencing any dissatisfaction, we're actually missing part of reality. So prolonged happiness, prolonged periods of happiness, this might be surprising, but prolonged periods of happiness this side of enlightenment is actually seen as being spiritually quite dangerous. It's almost like the central delusions become harder to see through. We can lose awareness of ourselves, of others, and we can become intoxicated with blissful states, and then we want to settle down into them. And this can lead to us losing a sense of urgency. The urgency that comes from remembering that we are mortal, that life is short, that time is precious. So then we stop putting in the effort. And if we stop putting in the effort, we stop sowing the seeds of our future happiness, of our future positive states. So the law of karma teaches us that positive fruits only come from striving. And if we stop striving, when conditions change and suffering comes our way, as it will, we're caught off guard. So we feel ill-equipped to cope with it. In a sense, we've weakened ourselves somehow. And this is why traditionally there is said to be a trapdoor from the heavenly realm straight down into the hell realm. So for all of these reasons, the Buddha in the God realm, he holds a musical instrument, a lute, and he plays the melody of impermanence, the reminder of impermanence. He doesn't give a lecture. He plays music, and music affects us directly. It has a direct effect on us. So he plays the melody of impermanence, which is a reminder that these refined pleasures, these positive states, are not going to last. However blissful they are, worldly pleasures are ultimately still unsatisfactory. So the melody sends us truth. It sends us the truth that we actually still have a long way to go, and it wakes us up to higher truths. So that leaves one last question about this realm. Is it a waste of time to try and cultivate them? Is it a waste of time to try and cultivate blissful mental states? If it's going to weaken us, if it's going to take our eye off the ball? Well, the answer is definitely not. It's definitely not a waste of time. And Sangha actually uses an analogy for this. He likens it to sleep. So he says that sleep isn't a waste of time. Sleep is refreshing, and if we've had a good night's sleep, we can wake up in a good mood and ready to get on with the day. But if we sleep too long, we wake up quite sluggish. So spending time in the God realm can be a welcome break, a welcome relief from the drudgery of worldly life, from the oppressions as they're described. And it gives us an opportunity to digest our experience, to absorb our experience, to get refreshed. So, getting into heavenly realms, it can be like a night full of sweet dreams, but it's still a dream. So, no need whatsoever to avoid refined pleasures, to avoid pleasure, but it should always be kept in the context of striving to keep awareness of ourselves as growing, developing individuals who are subject to both pain and pleasure, and who are totally dependent on conditions. And that brings us back nicely to the human realm. I'm just pointing that because you might want to come and look later. So the human realm shows men and women just going about their business, working, resting, playing, talking, reading, meditating, giving birth, living and dying. So in a sense, all life is here, all human life is here. And in the human realm, compared to the other realms, so we're not sinking in suffering, demoralised like hell dwellers. We're not floating in ecstasy, intoxicated, complacent like heavenly bliss bunnies. We're not fiercely competitive like titans. We're not obsessively, addictively craving like hungry ghosts. And our minds are not numbed by our urges for basic sensual pleasures like animals. There will be shades of all of those things in our experience of being in the human realm, but they don't predominate. And in the human realm, joy and suffering, pleasure and pain are both present in roughly equal measure. So earlier this year I was leading pilgrimages, and a couple of years' time Such Church and I will be leading another pilgrimage for a group from Sheffield, February 2015. And I was thinking about this, about as the person looking after visitors to India, what sort of experience to help them to have. So, and part of the challenge of being a pilgrimage leader is to make sure that pleasure and pain, joy and suffering are both there. So, you know, if I took people straight from the airport to a slum to see a project in Bombay, or if we travelled by third-class travel on a train, or if we stayed in a budget hotel, people would be so sort of preoccupied with the discomfort, with the suffering, they wouldn't actually be able to engage with the pilgrimage. But in the converse, if I sort of magically transported people from the airport in a helicopter with blackened windows, and if we travelled only by first-class travel, stayed only in 5-star hotels, then actually they wouldn't be seeing India at all. It would be an unreal experience. It's sort of it's important part of the human realm that there is access to both pleasure and pain, joy and suffering. So in this realm, we are able to satisfy our basic needs, and we're able to experience pleasure, but we realise the limitations of those things. We have something spare, we have some freedom and energy spare to develop higher states of awareness. And most importantly, we're able to act decisively for the good of ourselves and others, to really make something of our lives. So really this is the initial challenge of the spiritual life. Maybe the initial, the middle and the final challenge of the spiritual life is to be a human being in the fullest sense of the word. But what does that mean? What does it actually mean to be a human being? Clearly it's not enough to be born into a human body and to walk on 2 legs. Because biological evolution only takes us so far. And quite a typically cutting quote from Sangha Night, he says, "It's not enough to have less body hair than an ape or a slightly larger vocabulary." So what qualities really define a human being? The human state. If we see the human realm more as a metaphor, rather than literally what is a human being, what characterises the human state? So if I was to ask that question, what makes us human beings? What would be the first thing that came to your minds? Compassion? Emotions?
Self-reflective awareness.
Self-reflective awareness. Responsibility. Money. Ethics. Toothbrush. Okay. Some responses more literal than others. That's good. So, I had a bit of a brainstorm about this. First, before I go on to that, so a phrase I quite often hear is, if something goes wrong, quite often somebody says, "Oh, I'm only human. I'm only human after all." And it's almost like the human is quite a sort of low order of being. And I think when people say I'm only human, they're actually referring to other realms of the wheel of life. Because the more I reflected on what is actually involved in becoming a human being in the fullest sense, it's no mean feat actually to be a human being. So when I brainstormed, and of course being able to brainstorm is a characteristic of being a human being. So I just went through sort of different spheres of life. So in the intellectual arena, so we're able to understand concepts, we're able to reflect, to think ahead, to plan ahead. And above all, going back to Kate's point, we have self-reflective awareness, self-reflective consciousness. So very briefly, that's, we're aware, and we know that we're aware. So it's not just that we have awareness, that we have the ability to, in a way, step outside that and observe that. So it's self-reflective awareness. Then in the emotional realm, somebody mentioned emotions. So a human being, a fully developed human being, is able to love others regardless of what they're getting back. They're able to empathise, to have a compassionate response to suffering, to take pleasure in the good qualities of others, to experience gratitude, and also to forgive. A lot of these areas overlap. I don't know if forgiveness is an emotion, but I did very quickly. Communication. So compared to the animal realm, when I talked about the sort of quite basic levels of communication, so human beings are able to communicate much deeper meanings, much more complex meanings. And yeah, we're able to recognise other people's individuality without projecting too much onto them. Then there's the area of action. Bojanaga said ethics. So human beings able to act according to ethical principles and to take responsibility for their actions. So they have integrity. And also they're able to learn from their mistakes. And the other side of action is cooperation. So human beings have the capacity to cooperate with each other and particularly to act altruistically, to put others before themselves. And then there's aesthetics. So it's part of the human state is the ability to appreciate and imagine beauty and truth. There's something about the human state where there's a longing actually to unite with what is beautiful and true and satisfying. There's an existential sphere where we have awareness of ourselves in relation to the universe, and from that capacity we're able to perceive universal higher truths. And then there's myth, there's the mythical part of being human. So human beings are able to engage with myth, with poetry, symbol, ritual and archetype. And then, probably most relevant, is the spiritual aspect of the human state. The part of us which accepts and embraces constant movement and can make conscious choice to evolve. So maybe above all, in the human state we have the potential to break free. We have the potential to break free of reactive cycles, from old habits, and to respond creatively to the suffering that life inevitably throws up. And we have the potential to break free from self-centeredness, from disconnectedness, and to move towards interconnectedness. And in a way, all of these things mean that human beings can allow meaning to enter into their lives. So, if I had to sum it up in a sentence, I'd say what distinguishes a human being is their ability to allow meaning to enter their lives through all of these different spheres. And Sangha Night makes another point about the human being. So he says that none of us is complete. We are tossed up by our conditioning, biological, psychological, social and cultural, as partial beings. Our future lies in each one of us making something of him or herself, making of that miscellaneous bundle of conditionings a happy, free, clear-minded and emotionally radiant individual. Whew. So all in all, becoming a human being actually seems like quite a tall order. And for this very reason, the Buddhist tradition says, the Buddha in the Dhamma, is written in the Dhammapada, says that the human state is difficult to attain. Okay? So it's not just about being born into a human body. The human state is difficult to attain. But it's worth striving to attain it, because it opens up the opportunity to break free, to escape from the vicious circle of the wheel. And again, for this reason, the human state is seen as a precious opportunity, which should not be squandered. So in the Mahayana text, the Bodhicharya Avatara, when shall I find such rare circumstances again? The arising of a Buddha, faith, the human state itself, the capacity to practice ethical deeds, health, and this day with food and freedom from disaster. In a moment, life breaks its promise. The body is like an object on loan. So if we can inhabit the human realm more and more, if we can become more fully human, then we gain access to the point of freedom from the wheel. And again, Vidania will be talking more about that next week. Sorry if you have to delay your... I haven't quite got the key in my hands tonight. Again, in the human realm, there is a Buddha. And the Buddha of the human realm is dressed a bit differently. He's dressed in the robes of a monk. And he's carrying a begging bowl. And he's carrying the staff, which symbolises the religious practitioner, the spiritual practitioner. So the gift that the Buddha gives to human beings, to those who have attained the human state, is the spiritual life, is the spiritual path, which is the best means to make use of that most precious opportunity. So Buddhism doesn't start with a creation story, and it doesn't start with a theoretical model of existence. Buddhism starts with an experience. It starts with a feeling, and that feeling is suffering, or more, the better translation of the word dukkha is dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness. So that's an actual experience, and it's an experience that's an inevitable fact of life. In birth, in old age, sickness, death, separation from what we want, the discomfort of being around what we don't want. You know, it's always not far from hand. And this is the first noble truth of Buddhism. And it's not called noble truth. It's not saying that suffering is noble. Suffering is never noble. But what is noble is the realization of the universal truth of suffering, of dissatisfaction. Because when we realize that, that wakes us up. That wakes us up to the fact that we're not living life as we ought to live. There's something not quite right. So Buddhism isn't an anesthetic. It doesn't tell us to avoid suffering at all costs. In a way, it urges us to feel strongly. That's why it starts with the feeling of dissatisfaction. It urges us to feel strongly because that's what leads us to act effectively and decisively. So it's as if we're compelled to enter upon a path. And, that path starts with us becoming relatively positive, relatively integrated human beings, able to cope with a bit of discomfort, and able to commit ourselves to following a certain direction consistently. So, very often in life we value highly expertise and specialism. So when we think about contributions we can make, things that we can offer, we tend to think in terms of what we're really good at, what's my best quality, what's distinctive, what's special about what I can offer. But to fulfill our humanity, to know ourselves, to be ourselves, and to communicate the Dharma through our very humanness, that's probably the greatest gift that any of us can give.